Good morning again, and thank you for joining. I first like to thank the organizer, in particular Tony Dietz in Marieke. I think it was a real challenge to organize this meeting, and you did it, so bravo. Then I would like to say thank you to all the panelists. As you know, the idea of this panel was really to gather scholars in order to think and provide other lens through which we can analyze, write, and talk about slums. Also, to have a critical posture, providing critical analysis of what has been written about slums, at least over the last decades and maybe more. So in this perspective, we've received interesting papers, and I'm really excited. So thank you all for your significant contributions to this panel. The idea that Africa knows, for me, it's really powerful. And I think we must stay with that in our practice and our writings. As I mentioned in my last mail, we are having 2 sessions. And meaning 10 minutes, about 10 minutes for presentation and 5 for questions and discussion. So make sure we keep on time. We can have a break of 15 minutes between the 2 sessions, but we can also continue to spare time for discussion. Professor Frédéric Louveau will share the first session. She is lecturer at Gaston Berger University in Saint-Louis, Senegal, where she is responsible of a working group on minorities and globalization. And then Professor Serge Njoyukamge will share the second session. He is Associate Professor of Law at Thabo Mbeki African Leadership Institute in South Africa. He is the author of The Right to Development in African Human Rights Systems. I don't want to be long. So last thing, please make sure that your microphones are off when you are not speaking, but also don't forget to activate your microphone when you want to speak. Remember, you can also write your question on the chat. Again, thanks for joining, and many, many thanks to you, all the speakers. Frédéric, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Josiane. Thank you to everybody to be here with us. Welcome to everybody.
Yeah, as mentioned earlier by Frederick, I'm from Wageningen University on Research. I'm a PhD candidate at the Cultural Geography Group. This work is part of my PhD project. It's like an introductory part to provide an insight into the present dynamics of Abuja informal settlements. Abuja is the new capital of Nigeria. It used to be Lagos, but for the need for expansion and need for more land, for more development, it was moved to Abuja, its present location, in 1978. And it's one of the few capital city in Nigeria that have a master plan to guide its development. But for more than 40 years till now, it's still being affected with serious developmental problems, especially in terms of slums development and informal settlement. This is majorly because of some pre-existing indigenous communities in Abuja before the relocation that was supposed to be resettled or relocated from the city so that it will pave way for development based on the master plan. But it was not done, or it was not effectively done, and these indigenous communities were used or were expanded by the various migrant streams coming into the Abuja because of the new urban city. So with that, and because of the available land that was available that they think they could use for the developmental project of Abuja based on the master plan, these settlements were neglected, were not developed, and they keep growing, and now it seems to be a big problem for the development control agencies. Looking at Abuja from the space or from afar, you think Abuja is a well-planned city, but if you see this picture by the right, you see pockets of slum-like area region, and this type of settlements are all over Abuja. They represent the indigenous communities, most of the indigenous communities that were not resettled, that are now expanding into slum because of low-income earners and other migrants from a different part of the country coming to Abuja. These are the places they can easily settle or afford their accommodation. Most of the time, Abuja is in the news because of a demolition of these informal settlements, or also known as slums. All the time you hear demolitions, protests, and everything going on in Abuja because the planning agencies feel like they need to build Abuja according to master plan, and these settlements have to go. And over the time, the dwellers of it, these settlements have tried to resist this, and there are narratives of this resistance growing in Abuja now, where these people are protest, go to courts, protest, and demand for their rights or alternatives if they are to be displaced from their settlements. I think this is one of the things that made me want to look at these settlements critically, for the fact that most of these settlements usually claim, most of these dwellers claim that they are entitled to the land, they have the land rights, which is usually a customary land right because of their pre-existence in the lands before the coming of Abuja. Whereas the government will claim that they have been settled to be resettled, but they did not move away. But these dwellers usually claim that no, they have not been settled, they have not been compensated, they are not going anywhere. Most times they win the cases at the courts, and sometimes they also lose. But over the time, they've been growing, and their resistance is becoming stronger. I think because of a lot of things that we try to explore in this study. We see land rights and tenure security as the fundamental problem within this settlement that is usually the bone of contention most times. And some scholars have said this to address the issues of this informal settlement, these land rights, and the way the informal settlement dwellers perceive their land rights and the way the government is trying to enforce the statutory land rights on them need to be understood and analyzed before we really understand the issues in these informal settlements. And we added that for this, there's need for historical exploration to really understand the trend of their contention. So we try to use the concept of critical juncture and path dependency as an analytical framework for this study. And we choose in Pape, one of the biggest slum, if not the biggest slum in Abuja, as our case study to really explore the various issues that is happening around the other Abuja informal settlements. So we summarize most of our findings on this table, where we look at the antecedent conditions that produce these informal settlements and how they become informal settlements, starting from the Nigeria Land Use Act of 1978, that the government now use as the basis for denying most of the informal settlement dwellers that they don't have right to Abuja land, that all land within the new capital city belongs to the government. Yeah, but most times these people accept that, but they are demanding for a proper resettlement or compensation before they are evicted or displaced from their lands. So we see, and the 1979 master plan of Abuja also, which is currently being used, and many planners have claimed that this master plan is outdated to accommodate the present realities, but it's still being used as basis for demolition of most of these settlements, that they are not in line with the master plan. So for the critical junctures, which we try to see that, okay, to explain that these are the critical moments that are really defining this present dynamics. In the case of Mpape settlement, we look at Abuja resettlement program that is recommended by the master plan. And we notice that the Mpape did not fall inside among the settlement that's supposed to be resettled. So, so part of their contention is they are going to court and contesting this, that they want to be part of the resettlement program, because if any settlement is part of the resettlement program, they still have some level of security, hoping that one day they will be resettled. Even if the resettlement is not forthcoming, they are somehow immune from arbitrary displacement. So part of the contention now is they want to be part of the resettlement program whenever the government is ready to resettle the most of the indigenous communities. Then there's this another important one, which is the attempted demolition of the whole Mpape settlement in 2012, which seems to be the peak of the contention, which led to many of the dwellers coming together to go to court. They mobilized, they contributed a lot of money, hire senior lawyers to represent them in court. And after like 5 years of dragging the court cases and everything, the court finally asked the government to keep the demolition on hold, pending when these people are compensated or given alternative. So I think they've not provided alternative for them now, but they still live in fear. And most times, some of the workers of these government development agencies still visit this settlement to carry out some demolition. That's against the court's injunction. But however, this over time, these people, their resistance practice have been growing, and they find a way to network their ways to the people that are in power, and they form association, media campaign to always drive up their right and agitate for support. So the most one of the things they usually do, at least to keep the developers away from their land, is planting of economic trees like cashew trees in their lands that is yet to be, because if any land is vacant, government will stop anybody from building it and collect it for developers for other projects. So most times they find a way to plant economic trees, even if it's not yielding anything. So any developer that is coming to the land, we have to pay for all the economic trees and multiply it in thousands of nairas, and which is like a big money that's usually scared of a lot of developers, because if they do not do it, the residents in the settlement usually find a way to stop them, thereby mobilizing themselves or turning it to violence. And they usually also go to courts to also get a lot of court injunctions against these developers. Also, over time, they also have find their ways to connect with most of their sympathizers or people that they associate with in government agencies, that whenever there is any attempt by the government, or if the government is planning to come and demolish their settlement or take any land, they are actually informed beforehand, and they find a way to mobilize and protest or block the road before any of the government officials come here to carry out any development control exercise. So we, using the concept of that critical juncture and path dependency, we were able to highlight some historical processes that are defining this the present dynamics in Abuja. But we still see that it's not enough, at least, to really understand these present contentions and the resistance, which is involving the state and other different actors. Because in some cases, we find that there are cases of the states directly or indirectly supporting these informal settlement dwellers. So it shows that they have actors within the state that are also sympathetic to their cause. So it gives room for more exploration inside to this contention to really understand the full dynamics. I think that's all.
Thank you very much, Ismael. Thank you. We can take 1 or 2, 3 minutes for the discussion on your presentation. So I can keep 1 or 2 questions, and if we have time after all the presentations, we can have a good discussion. But we can discuss your paper if there is 1 or 2 questions among the participants. No question? So we can listen all the participants. It can be a good idea, I think. And after all, we can have a good discussion. Sorry?
I can see 2 hands. Somebody want to ask a question?
I would like to ask something.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Thank you. So thank you very much for your fascinating presentation. I would like to hear a little bit about who are the residents of these settlements. Where do they come from? You mentioned the significance of pre-existing indigenous communities, but I mean, do all the residents identify as such? Is it possible, or are there others? What are the relationships of those others to the indigenous communities, and who can claim that status of being indigenous? What role does it play in the overall scheme of things?
Okay, thank you. The indigenous communities are originally, I think they are the original inhabitants of these settlements, but because of urbanization, the migrants from different parts of Abuja coming into Abuja usually find these settlements easily affordable to live in, and most times the indigenous dwellers or their root leaders usually sell their lands to these migrants. So over time, they've grown to form a heterogeneous population that you can hardly distinguish indigenous from non-indigenous. So yeah, I think, and most times if they are going for the protest or going for the agitation or anything, they usually do it together, because the indigenous people are the ones that sell lands, or having their houses are being rented by these migrants. So they actually do their protests together.
Thank you very much. Another question?
Yes. Thank you, Ismail. I was triggered by the part of the resistance, so that within the slums, that the bulldozers came from the authorities to bulldoze the buildings. So based on the research and your findings you got in Abuja, what would you want to tell slum communities all over in different slums in African cities to focus on if they want to create these critical junctures? So what did you find to be solutions that could work in building a new trajectory, or those that failed?
Yeah, I think the issue of slum and informal settlement is a complex problem in Africa, and usually it's determined by the state, the role of the state in it. It depends on the approach the state is taking. So most time, if the state wants to use force, it's hard to really resist. They can come with their military armed personnel to demolish any settlements. But what I found that is really helping these slum dwellers of Abuja is that they've really negotiated their way into with people in power, especially the politicians, that can easily influence these state agencies. If they want to carry out any development control exercise, they can easily call them to order or say no, stop. And they also have their people, like these indigenous settlers. Many of them are educated and also working in these government agencies. So they usually give pre-hand information to them in case of any impending demolition or activity. So they will quickly find a way to call those they have in power, mobilize and everything to prevent this from happening.
Okay, so it's my turn.
Okay, it's your turn.
Okay, thank you very much.
We listen to you.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, thank you to the organizers for having me, and to everybody else for being here and listening. I will try to share my screen here. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay.
It's okay.
Right. So, as you can see, my presentation deals with infrastructures, or what I call infrastructuring as a process, and specifically as a social process. Since Namibia's independence in 1990, the country's capital, Windhoek, has grown rapidly, from over 100,000 residents to over 400,000. Formal measures of access to land, housing, and basic services have not been sufficient, which has led to a constant growth of informal settlements and other forms of precarious residence. And I have here some aerial images from three such areas in 2004 and 2018 to demonstrate that growth. So this is the first area in 2004 and 2018. The second one, 2004, 2018. And the third one, 2004 versus 2018. So my paper deals with how people living in these conditions deal with infrastructural lacks and deficiencies, and what kinds of relationships are involved. And I also consider how the residents interact with various authorities, such as city officials and local politicians, over infrastructural provision, and with what consequences. This paper is based on fieldwork that I've carried out in 2016 and 2019, but it's complemented by materials that I've accumulated since the 1990s. So I will first try to give you an idea of what I mean by social infrastructuring. And after that, I will describe the two sides of the practices of that social infrastructuring in Windhoek. First, the multiple forms of mutual relations of provision among residents, and second, their long-term interactions with authorities. And finally, I will briefly try to say something about the broader implications of what happens here in Windhoek. So, what is social infrastructuring? First of all, I contend that infrastructures should not be seen as non-human technological artifacts, but rather as assemblages of human and non-human components. Infrastructural conditions make social and political relations visible, including inequalities. However, in my view, infrastructural lacks or deficiencies can also become interstices where forms of sociality and creative grassroots solutions can grow. These include do-it-yourself and co-produced infrastructures, tactics of overcoming regulatory denials of access, and claims over provision. The need to ensure provision brings people together in particular ways, and then, in turn, the ensuing social forms can have effects on the reshaping of technical infrastructures. And furthermore, infrastructural provision is not just about meeting daily needs. Struggles and negotiations over access simultaneously incubate visions of better society and therefore have implications on citizenship, governance, and urban forms. So let me now turn to the practices of infrastructuring among residents in Windhoek. The idea of social infrastructuring is in principle applicable to all urban residents, but it is pronounced in the precarious urban fringes. For the propertied classes who live in environments such as here in the picture, access to infrastructure and services tends to follow quite unproblematically from property ownership. For the residents of informal settlements, on the contrary, provision and arrangements of infrastructure and services are a central part of their daily navigations, struggles, and relations. The situation in Windhoek is characterized simultaneously by relatively capable legal and administrative authorities and by acute lacks or failures of the formal infrastructural grid. And the residents devise their strategies accordingly. Socially networked provision of basic necessities combines with persistent demands for better provision and for officially recognized tenure rights. So the residents continually rely on systems of mutual assistance and networked provision, of which I can here only offer a few glimpses. In the sphere of housing, reliance on relatives and friends is common, as is resorting to informal markets. Accessing land and trying to achieve increasing tenure security involves harnessing and cultivating relationships with acquaintances and neighbors. When it comes to electricity and water, residents of the informal settlements have developed systems of facilitating access in the absence of formal provision. In principle, electricity connections are only available to those on formalized plots. In practice, it is quite common for informal residents to get electricity from houses with official connections. Water then tends to be the first public service provided in the informal areas in the form of prepaid communal taps. However, newest areas still go without. In such areas, collective systems for fetching water have evolved. In areas that have taps, they are in principle restricted to those who are officially registered residents. But in such areas, sharing water tokens is common. So these are very briefly just few indications of all kinds of things that are going on. But how should we understand such transactions and exchanges? That's what I'm primarily interested in. At times, such relations are portrayed as commercial exchange. However, more often they are depicted either as established relationships of reciprocal contributions, or as help or sharing that takes place because of a close relationship between the participants. In addition to such forms of networked provision, the residents are simultaneously engaged in prolonged interaction with municipal officials and low-level political authorities to receive better services and tenure security. This relationship in Windhoek cannot be readily understood through the interpretive prisms of abandonment and resistance that are quite common in the literature on slums and informal settlements. While such elements are present also in Windhoek, the situation is more complicated, because far from being forgotten or merely controlled, the situation of the informal residents is a widely acknowledged concern and the objective of multiple efforts towards improvement. In such efforts, from one point of view, the informal residents are at the mercy of the goodwill of the authorities, as they have few legally recognized rights. However, from another point of view, the way in which their situation is perceived as an outrage, as well as their status as voters, places them in a position to put pressure on the authorities. Individually, being a known member of the local community, as well as the length of the duration of your presence might help you to establish yourself more firmly. And so do concrete indicators of presence, such as being a registered resident or numbered, as they say, or a holder of a water token, for example. At the level of just a moment. Okay. At the level of whole neighborhoods, informal areas gradually receive more services and may eventually become formalized townships, at which stage the residents may receive their own plots and individual service connections. In practice, this process of upgrading is marred by lack of funds and is extremely slow. But perhaps its key significance is not in the outcomes, but rather in the room that the participatory approach it advocates offers to the informal residents to try to establish themselves and achieve improvements, to make claims, to become recognized. Over time, the demands of the residents contribute to planning processes and provision decisions. This also works the other way around, resident claims reflecting what the existing policies and official statements promise. So in this way, infrastructure becomes a field or arena of co-production and also a conduit for the formation of socio-political relations. So now, what broader significance or implications does this story have? I suggest that we can fruitfully examine infrastructure as an arena for creating relationships and obligations. Many ground-level forms of social infrastructuring, such as those that I've described in the paper, rely on more or less symmetrical relationships of mutual assistance, of sharing or reciprocity between kin, friends, and peers. These offer ways of occupying urban space and creating political community that organize around extended personalized exchanges and an associated sense of mutual dependencies, rather than impersonal, isolated transactions. Furthermore, relationships between the residents and the authorities are also largely understood in terms of mutual dependencies, but of a hierarchical, asymmetrical kind, where recognition, respect, and following of authority are exchanged for access. So, infrastructural provision can be used for generating allegiance that demands support as its counterpart, but at the same time, such provision creates expectations that feed claims where the authorities become the obligated party. This kind of model of hierarchical mutual dependencies has a long history in the forms of political consolidation in the Southern African region. It was characterized by a tendency to accumulate followers and their reproductive and labor power already in the pre-colonial era, and has been carried through to the present as a strong expectation. Contemporary Namibian precarious urbanites resent what they see as a moral parasitic forms of clientelist appropriation for political or material gain. But simultaneously, they strive towards a benevolent, responsive, and caring public authority that lives up to its perceived obligations towards its citizens. To conclude, the conditions and efforts described in this paper are of utmost importance to Namibians who face them as part of their daily realities. However, in my view, they also have universal significance when we try to rethink the grounds of socio-political cohesion and economic citizenship in a world that increasingly faces the erosion of full employment as an organizing principle, coupled with transformations and shortages related to environmental and economic crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lely Metsola. Thank you very, very much. I take some question for you.
I will have a question.
Okay, please.
Yes. I was wondering if, in your understanding of social infrastructure, we can consider social networks as a social infrastructure, or if we can just consider them as a foundation for social infrastructure, or if they are so tied to social infrastructure that we cannot, deal with them separately.
I would say that there are obviously relationships that are significant beyond their infrastructural implications. So in that sense, I would not just blend the two together. But then on the other hand, there are also kinds of relationships that form around a certain infrastructural problem, and that are kind of narrower in that sense. But then again, those might have implications. I mean, they for how the overall social system or structure becomes reformed over time. So I don't know how to give any kind of simple answer to that. I don't know. I don't think there is a simple answer to that question, and I don't know if I'm really answering your question. I'm just trying to think from that starting point somehow.
Thank you. Another question?
I can see some raised hands. Yes. So.
Can I try?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. A very interesting paper. And let me say it's completely all right to do it this way. But if you approach it from the social infrastructuring point of view, I think there is too much of what I would call a secular gaze. This panel is about innovations, and slum people innovate, and a lot of the innovations go in ways that are connected to their social organization, through churches, through sports clubs, through music clubs and choirs, etc. And my observation is that a lot of the ways of learning to organize things start there, and they also build confidence and they build leadership, and from there they also dare to attack the authorities or claim their own rights. The way you approach it seems to ignore this social networking, and I wonder if in your research you have touched on it, and if it also is part of doing research.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, that's a very important point, and I acknowledge that that definitely many of the models or forms of networking that people utilize in relation to infrastructures and infrastructuring have their origins somewhere else, but that's kind of a delimitation that I made here, that I really want to focus on the aspects of infrastructuring and not try to list or discuss all because they are quite multiple, the sources of the social networks and relations that people have. That doesn't mean that I want to ignore them or that I don't want to acknowledge their existence. Definitely they are there, and thank you for making that important point. I might need to think how to deal with that without having to write 50 more pages.
Another question?
Yes, hello, can I ask?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Hello.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. I just wanted to know what could be the cultural influence to this infrastructuring, as there are many different ethnic groups in Namibia. I would like to know if you also treat that in your paper, or if you can tell me more about that. What are these influences?
You mean now? Can you perhaps come again? Influences of what?
Then these different ethnic groups. How is it playing a role in this social infrastructure?
Right. Well, I really didn't see any kind of significant differences in the way in which people of different ethnic origins organize in this respect. Perhaps I haven't looked deep enough into that, but I think, I mean, obviously there are things such as people tend to cluster, for example, in terms of residence around ethnic or regional origins quite often. But the ways in which they deal with problems, the kinds of relationships that are involved, I think they mainly transgress this kind of ethnic boundaries. There isn't. I didn't see a specifically Herero way of organizing things in relation to these infrastructural problems versus an Ovamba way of organizing things in relation to these infrastructural problems, for example.
Thank you.
Thank you. A last question?
Okay, thanks. So also in my own research about youth in relation to the state, I found, especially within the informal settlements, I found three places: confrontational, so directly confronting the state; critical, so not directly confronting, but still thinking about the state; and the last one was isolated. So they are creating new citizenships and realities, although they do it isolated from the state. They ignore the state, and the state ignores them, and therefore, even though they have this social infrastructuring, it's not really leading to political power or political innovations. What did you see? Did you saw that they remained isolated, or it also gained a different relation to the state?
Yeah. Well, as I tried to point out in the context of Windhoek, the reach of the municipality and local level political authorities is quite pervasive. It's quite difficult to isolate yourself, and the people who live in these conditions, they are not, even though in popular rhetoric there's often the phrase that they have been forgotten, but that's not really the case in my view. Not in the sense that they would be isolated from these authorities in any way, because it's not quite possible even. But the other I would say that the other two that you mentioned, the other two logics or modes of relationships, the confrontational one and the critical one, they definitely are there. But as I tried to point out in the context of Windhoek, also the kind of collusive and co-producive forms of agency are quite important. I don't know if I got your question correctly and provided any satisfactory answer.
Yeah, no, definitely. I will delve into this co-productive mode.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. Perhaps we can hear Joanna Messon now. Joanna Messon. She's not here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Ah, okay. Joanna, yes.
Yeah. Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Okay, so
as you can see, the presentation is going to be about this NGO called Ikayalani. I was working for them for 4 months, during 4 months in Cape Town, South Africa. And it was really important for me because it was an experience in order to get involved in the construction industry, but in a way that is bottom up, rather than from big multinational to the small enterprises. So it's quite the opposite of the other presentation I was supposed to do a few weeks ago. So let me show you what is important in this presentation. It's basically the protection of human rights and the need to tackle informal housing issues and to present the association action in order to solve this. So the United Nations SDGs are the framework in which many NGO and enterprises are trying to put their activities on. They are trying to show what is relevant in their activities by linking them to the SDGs. So that's why it's the starting point of my presentation. So housing is a fundamental right. As we know, everybody needs house in order to involve themselves in the society, and so the housing issue is the first. The housing issue for me.
Joanna,
Yes.
Joanna, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Can you speak either, please? We can't hear you very well.
Okay. Maybe can you hear me better?
Okay, it's better. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
You're welcome. There's no issue. So you have here the SDGs, the MDGs. Sorry, which I'm sorry, I'm stressing. Okay. There's the Millennium Development Goals, which were the first tools in order to involve many actors in the sustainable project for the planet. And after this, it was replaced by the SDGs, which are quite the same but broader because they want to encompass many other actors. So in this later issues, the action of Ikayarani is very related to the ones I'm showing to you right now. So they are involved in a challenge in order to reduce all these inequalities. So in Africa and in the world globally, housing is a major issue. So as you can see in this presentation, there's many of the people who are living in slums are located in Asia and in Africa. And the situation is going to continue to grow because the population that is willing to go to the cities in order to find jobs are making the urbanization even more fast. So it's going to be so yeah, there's growth in this yeah, so there's the growth in the population, which is putting a stress on the cities, and so people really need to tackle this issue of urbanization. So what can be important with that is that when you tackle this issue, you can also solve many others, as density and the rest. And because the more people are close together, the more it's easy for them to find common solutions. So in Africa, there's a problem with the density because even though there's a low density in the continent, when you go to the urban centers, you can see that the density is really high. So we have a continent where the population is really scattered in the rest of the continent, but in the cities there's a big stress that is not resolved yet. So in South Africa, which the story is really complex and related to apartheid, you can see that the distinction is economic but also social. It's there's issues for, I mean, people are distinguished in they are distinguished because of the color of their skin, and so it's a multi-factor. There's an issue that is multi-layered. So the problem is that after the apartheid, the situation was not really solved. There was many problems, but not enough in order to not enough in order to fill the gap, the housing gap. So as you can see, there's what we call a backlog. It means that when there's houses that are built, there's still even more important number of people who are not having houses. So this problem is not really solved for now. And when it comes to informal settlements, that means the housing projects that are not in the formal sector, but created and fostered by the people themselves, we can see that there's an emergency because this situation is making it really complicated to solve the disease and the fire, which are the most important issues by now in the informal settlements. So here is a map in order to see what is the difference of the difference of revenue of income in Cape Town, and you can see that it's really related to the density. Like when you can, as you can see, where the density is low, the income is high, and when the density is quite important, the income is well, not that important. And as you can see, is related also to the je suis en conférence. Wow. Okay. I'm sorry. Can you? So as you can see in Cape Town, there's a difference between the population. As we decided. I'm sorry, I'm currently in the hospital, so that's why I'm not. I cannot have any intimacy to share this presentation. So yeah, as you can see, the difference between all the neighborhoods in Cape Town. I'm going to go directly to the presentation of Ikayalani. So Ikayalani is an NGO where the entire team is working in order to alleviate to. Oh, sorry. Okay. I'm sorry, I cannot really. So yeah, Ikayalani is an NGO that is working since 2006 on the issue of the township. So they are making all these activities. As you can see, there's a large range of activities. The first one they do is the prevention, because they try to design new paths and new roads in order to leave enough space for the public services um, to be given in this neighborhood. So the first thing they do is they try to create small communities or to rely on the existing communities in order to show how they can design that by themselves their neighborhood. And the population, the people there are really willing to be involved in that, because with the RDP, which was after the apartheid, many people were not able to have their houses, so they just built some shacks like this. And so this NGO is trying to create a sense of community and also involve many people. They designed this tool that is like a game. It's like a game when you can try to move the shacks in some directions in order to create a new path and new roads, so that people can send the police or send the the emergency, the help, the medicine, and everything. So the rebuilding project is what I just showed you. So as you can see, it's like that they prepare the rebuilding. And yeah, so yeah, that's the rebuilding process. The disaster response is what is the most important for me, because it's really when people are endangered and they try to survive in the point. But for example, there are many times people get injured because of fires, for example. And I remember when I was there that we had to see a beneficiary to rebuild a part of the neighborhood, because some burglars came to this house and burned it down in order to steal everything they had. And so it's really difficult all the time it's really difficult to prevent fires, because it's people who are living in those townships who are making it. So the disaster response is, as you can see, is when Ikayalani provide new pieces of zinc in order to create new kind of houses. But what is important is what they can do inside, because as you can see, they have a floor that is well prepared, and it's better than what is supposed to be inside. So another project was the project in Shack. And the Empower Shack project was in the same it was the same idea. It was the idea of creating new spaces, new places for the population of the township of Cape Town. But this one is different because it's there are bricks in it. It's not just pieces of zinc. It's zinc plus bricks, or sometimes it's like here was the first prototype without bricks, and this one has bricks, as you can see on this picture. And there was 3 prototypes in total. No, 2 prototypes and 1 final project. And this project was made with various participants. And the idea was the same. It was to prevent a situation where the population cannot be safe. So,
Joanna,
yes.
Joanna, I'm sorry. 1 minute for your conclusion, please.
Well, for the conclusion, I was willing to show you a video. Okay, I think I can stand it. Yeah. So. Okay.
Most of our time, households struggle to permanent. Thousands of informal settlements, residents shared water. Local NGO e-pylon, local intersection, began to develop urban planning via both our performance and communication. I added a second story that frees up space for public use and emergency services. While reduce their supply and private sanitation facilities, improve safety and health residents. Our approach includes
Joanna, we cannot hear the comments. Please, can you increase the volume of your computer?
Okay. Well,
Thank you.
I think it's better for me to stop here and start to listen to what other people have to say, because I'm really not in a good situation to do this presentation. I'm sorry. I was not able to tell you this before, and I'd rather stop there. If you have any question, I can respond by text, but I think I have to stop now. So please accept my apologies. I'm not in a situation where I can do it. Sorry.
Okay, thank you very much, Joanna. We understand very well. Don't worry for that. So we can take questions.
Yes, sure.
So 1 question. if I can, I have one question for all the participants of this panel. It is very, very interesting. And my question is very general. I would like to come back to about actors, the actors in this configuration in these slums. But I would like to come back to religious actors, because we are urban configurations with many actors who are doing something and are innovative. And in other countries, in these urban configurations, religious actors are very innovative, and they make a competition with state, with other actors about a lot of things. They can construct some place for water access, or hospitals, or buildings, or something like that, or activities, or educational activities for young people, something like that. So I would like to hear you about the religious the role of religious actors in these configurations. Did you see something about that in your fieldwork, or something like that? What are their role in your fieldwork, if you can see it?
Well,
it's for Joanna and for the other two, please.
Okay. Well, when I was working in the field, there was no specific issues with religious actors, because most of the people were, well, they were mostly Christians, or they were believing in other religions, like yeah, there were Christians, but some people were involved in groups, religious groups, what we call in French sect. So sometimes they were really kind of mesmerized because of this situation, because they were poor. I mean, they are poor, but when they go to the church, when they go to churches like that, they think that they are going into something higher than their situation, and they give a lot of money for that, to escape from their situation, thanks to religious actors. But myself, I was not really concerned by it, because I think it was because most people, I mean, they get together really because of the color of their skin, or their religion and their income. So most of the time, the people I was seeing were mostly Christians, because the people who were Muslims were rather colored most of the time. And in the township where I was, there was not that much colored people, only Black Christian people most of the time. So the religion was not that important for them, and not really important for the project either. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I also saw in the slums of Kampala, I saw several interactions that I think could also have political meaning between religious groups. So one, we saw a more negative development, is that a very conservative religious groups from the United States, they interacted about anti-gay perspectives and ideologies, and you saw through these networks that actually it radicalized the societies and the nations. So you saw that ideas that were not critical at one stage, and then they became or they got imported ideas through religion organizations, and then mainly it was often pastors or religious leaders. But you could also see that because of the religion, it really connected people that would have never connect otherwise. So you saw individuals just go to a church, a local church, and through that way build close personal relationships that started small projects, and then actually it created a sort of unity among continents. So it provided a very good uniting aspect. But you also saw that it connected communities with all other communities. So, for example, not one person to another person, but a specific church or several churches connected to another church in the Netherlands or somewhere else, and then it built a community. So they together they shared ideas, and through that shared community, through social media or to other ways of communicating, they kept visiting each other, and together they learned from each other. So both the visiting religious community, they learned from the local experiences and grew in a way themselves, and the other way around. So you saw that both benefited from that relationships.
So basically, my paper today is titled Art Intervention and Activism Towards Psychoartistic Reformation and Social Change. Now, in line with this topic, I have gone ahead to develop another subtitle, which is Mobilizing Children for Activism and Social Reformation within Makoko Slum. I understand I have 10 minutes. I would have loved to spend 10 hours, but I'll just try and restrict myself. So I'm just going to talk about the key areas of this presentation, and it will include a brief presentation, a brief description of the study area, which is Makoko Slum, the objectives of the study, the theoretical background, methodology of the study, a report on the theater experience in Makoko, and of course, I'll be talking about the significance of the study. Now, my study area is Makoko Slum. Now, Makoko Slum is a very, very popular site in Lagos, and its popularity is not a result of some international network or some skyscrapers or some state-of-the-art technology found within this area. Neither is Makoko the business hub of Lagos State. Rather, Makoko is today known as a tourist attraction, so to speak, because of the deplorable living condition within Makoko, as we can see on the screen. Makoko is situated along 3rd Mainland Bridge. Now, Lagos State is supposedly the biggest city in Nigeria. So this is where you have Makoko. Now, Makoko, most of the shelters here, I will not call them buildings. They are constructed on stilts within the waterlogged area. And most of the inhabitants of this slum are people from faraway Dahomey, some of them who were ravaged by war, who first settled in Badagry, and then later on they found other places of settlement in Lagos State and in other parts of Nigeria. Also within this region, you would find some Yoruba people from southwest Nigeria and some Ijos from the south Nigeria, all living together within this region. Now, Makoko is surrounded, like I said, by black oily water. So majority of the people survive around the year fishing and trading within this community, and sometimes making connections with neighboring communities. Now, on entering Makoko, one is confronted with the reality of some sort of government's abandonment. Now, because aside from the stench that the water emits, which is not very good for health-wise, you'd also see cramped population. There's a lot of people. There's so much filter around this area. As a matter of fact, you would describe, what you can do is describe this area as a proper slum. And a lot of people live here, they dine here, they survive around the year within the slum. And yet you can see no sign of electricity, although at some point, some members of the community try to install some poles, electric poles, but you can still see no sign of electricity, no modern schools, no road networks aside from the waterways. It's obvious that the government has completely abandoned these people. Rather than help them, they consistently serve these people with eviction notice without provisional alternative. Now, I am aware that Lagos State is not the only place where you have slum. And as a matter of fact, the international communities are of the opinions that slums should be upgraded, make it a very humane and human environment to be habitable for people. But that's not happening in Lagos State. It's not happening around Makoko slum. So this project was initiated in 2019 for two specific reasons. The first reason is to call back the attention of the federal government, specifically the Lagos State government, back to this region, back to the infrastructural needs of these people. And then the second is to use arts as an interventionist agenda or an interventionist tool towards children's psychosocial and psycho-artistic reformation within Makoko region. The objectives of this study include to provide insight into the ethnocultural patterns, the living conditions, and the infrastructural needs of the people, to develop children's creative talents, artistic attitude, and skills needed for social change within Makoko. The third is to mobilize the children towards psychosocial and psychoartistic reformation and social action devoid of violence and attacks. I'll be taking time to explain the third one specifically later on. And lastly, to develop theoretical framework and methodologies for children performance-based activism for educational purposes. This study is anchored on social activism and activism. Now, social activism, as an offshoot of the constructivist school of thought, involves actions, it involves movement, it involves activities initiated to intercede or intervene in situations to impede a process, to promote equality, or redirect a chosen cause, which may be socially, politically, environmentally, culturally, and otherwise. Activism, on the other hand, the premise of activism, on the other hand, is constructed and based on the belief that arts specifically or art expressions can be used for social intervention. Now, activism basically expresses itself by challenging the known status quo of prejudice, of marginalization and inequality in order to promote peace, intersectionality, stability, and understanding in different quarters. Now, having said that, this study as an ethnographic research adopts the qualitative method, and in this qualitative method, the field research is used for collecting the primary data, while the secondary data is collected via library research. Now, for the field research, the study adopts two tools, which includes the interview method and the participants' observation, that is active participants' observation, which basically involves going to live within Makoko for stipulated a number of days or weeks in order for data, primary data, to be collected within the region. Now, I'm going to give a report on the Makoko theater experience, and this will constitute the findings for this study. Now, let me quickly say that this project we started in 2019 is still inconclusive. And the obvious reason is the global pandemic situation that crept in on the world unannounced. So it's understandable, I guess, if I present a report of the process rather than the performance itself. So this performance, like I said, the rehearsal started in 2019, and we discovered a lot. We came across, we met a lot of challenges. And these challenges, like I said, will constitute the findings. The first challenge will be the language and communication barrier. We discovered, for instance, that these children could not speak a word. We picked children between the age of 5 and 15, and then we discovered that they could not even speak a word in English. Many of them could only speak in Ogu dialect, some of them in Yoruba, some of them I won't say, well, it's not our language, national language, but some of them could not even say a word at all in English. So that was the first one. And then secondly, we discovered that many of the children were out of school. Now, it is not because they didn't want to be in school, because there were some floating school around which many of them could actually attend if they needed to or if they wanted to. We discovered that many of them were just disinterested completely in learning. They just didn't want to be in school for any reason because they didn't see the importance of getting such education. So it was, but however, we noticed that when we introduced arts, the research team is composed of somebody in drama and music, or somebody in drama and dance, the other person from music, and then the other person from visual arts. So I took the place for the person in drama and dance, I discovered that many of them, when we started, we had about 10 children, 10 to 20 children. In the third week, we discovered that we already had up to 50 children. And then in the fourth to fifth week, we had well over 100 children. It means that it is not that these children are not willing to learn. The question will be, what do they really want to learn? And we discovered that arts would be a good way to teach these children. And then we started the process. And lastly, we noticed that many of the children lacked self-confidence. Now, it is not just because they could not speak in English. It was just because perhaps of the situation around them. However, while the rehearsal progressed, we also noticed that some of these students were well talented. Many of them, all you needed to do was just to give them a movement. They would start creating other movements, and then they would start teaching on each other. So it was a case of untapped or unharvested talents. This place is filled up with a lot of children and a lot of talents. They just need some more people to come to the environment to do some things for them. As we can see in the picture, here is the presenter and then the colleague and some of the children behind the teachers. Now, lastly, we also noticed that many of the children never really left this region. So they do not even understand what it means to be deprived. They do not understand what it means to be marginalized. Now, in my own world, I'm seeing a situation whereby there's a better world outside for these children. But they are not even aware that they are deprived. They are not even aware that a lot of things happen outside of this vicinity. So these are my findings. Now, I'll go straight to the last part, which is the significance of the study. The first is that this project presents a paradigm shift in the construction of social activism. Now, most times we often consider adults as catalysts for social change. Now, this is not to say that children haven't been performing, but that we consider children as the catalyst for change is seldom explored, especially in this part of the world. This project creates models and canons for raising the consciousness of children and incorporating activism into mainstream urban theater experience. I don't think I need to explain that. Then lastly, the study seeks to promote healthy negotiations by creating a human-friendly environment. Any attempt at breaking the walls of inequity and class marginalization can never constitute a futile effort of humanity in the avoidance of brutality and violence confrontation. Thank you.
Thank you. And also thank you for keeping the time. I would like immediately to take the next presenter. If Dr. Albert Okoilome is in the room, then if it's not, we will proceed with Eric, Dr. Eric van der Zanden. I hope I did not change your name, Eric. If I did, sorry for that. Please keep. Yes, please. Thank you. You can go ahead.
Okay. I'm still an aspirant PhD. I'm not yet a doctor, unfortunately, but I hope one time in the future I will.
I just prophesize, Eric, you will become a doctor soon.
I hope so.
Okay. It will be.
So I can share. It says you cannot start screen share while the other participant is still sharing. So my focus is on the youth in slums. And then in particular, there was Honwana, which put focus on the concept of waithood, that even though youth are in situations that they are, because of poverty or that they're unable to switch to adults, they remain in a sort of a difficult period where they face challenges and in that poverty. And then there are actually two ways that they often react. One is the political instability and the political innovation. I will focus on political innovation, but first I want to explain why this political instability is still one of the dominant narratives about youth in slums. And I think it's based on the ideas from Malthus, which said that you have population growth, then the population growth is exponential, although the other productive, the food remains static. So you have this problem that the population is growing faster, and therefore you create disease comes or conflict. So it's based from a perspective of scarcity. I think this perspective from scarcity is still the main narrative about population growth, both in urbanization, but also other population growth. However, there was another scholar which said, after Malthus, Boserup, she said, no, when people face scarcity, they don't end up in instability or war or disease, but they want to survive. So they have to innovate. And through that innovation, they turn the situation of scarcity into a situation of new solutions. And then personally, I was also thinking, I'm still thinking, maybe you'll have ideas with me, but I think that the difference between whether youth villages will result into political instability or conflict instead of political innovation, I think education and ideas are the difference in what decides if political innovation occurs. And then I did field work in Kampala for 3 months, 2019, but I've been, I'm not, for the PhD I plan to do, I'm still in daily contact and collecting data. And I found that there are 3 main locations for political innovation in Kampala. One is the slums, the universities, and the civil society organizations. And then the interesting thing is that these are not static, so they interact with each other. So it's especially when they come together that I think, or that I saw that political innovation happened. And then one thing reminds me from Amilcar Cabral about class suicide. So he said that the elite, the young national bourgeoisie, when they committed class suicide, so they did not stay in their elite environment, but they went to the common people, to the urban, or to the rural areas, and actually lived with the people. That from that alliance or connection, innovative things happened. So one, the elite, they learned to appreciate the normal people and the harsh realities. While in fact, the rural people, the peasants, they got the ideological ideas and the organization skills from this educated youth. So that connection proved interesting in coming together. So you also see in Kampala that especially students or musicians or leaders which have grown up in the slums go to the universities, they build bridges between the both groups. And why is this political innovation so important? Because there are 3 main modes of how states are governed. You have where the power of the state is dominant, and then you see often despotic governments. So in majority of African countries, you still see that the power of the state is stronger than the power of society. However, you also can have that the power of society is much stronger. So they just protect themselves from power control, from authority, and they remained based on the community. So the community is all powerful, and then they are governed by norms and by community rules. So you still see that in that way, they remain in a sort of status quo. However, there's also an alternative, the shackled state, and that is where power of society is to such an extent powerful that they can control the state. They still have a powerful state, but it's controlled by the people in checks and balances. And when people find ways to shackle their state, they enter a corridor. It's called a narrow corridor. And if they're in that corridor, then social, political, economic, cultural growth will happen for a long or for a period. So this is also the turning point. When people enter these narrow corridors, that can be a turning point in history that they will move to a certain path. And then so when we zoom in again to the slums of Kampala, we saw one of, maybe you know him, Bobby Wine, Robert Chiyokalanyu, and you saw that he called himself an outcast, but also with the musicians and the youth in that harsh realities, in the waithood. You saw that You also had the opposition leaders, and they had these political speeches, but you found that new ways were invented in using music and symbols for communicating these old political ideas about what could be done for the betterment of the fellow youth, but then repackaged to the youth itself and those without education in slums. And Bobby Wine called themselves edutainment, but it's also based on the idea that the current the education is sometimes still based on colonial inherited structures or ways how it's taught. So they teach the citizens, the youth into obedient subjects instead of critical citizens. So you find that people do not find the ideas and the skills that are needed for these critical citizens in the current education system. So they find new ways of political innovation to turn them from these subjects into citizens. And what you also saw in the slums, that because of this political innovation, they started to find new ways how to interact with the state. So I talked about the three methods before, about the confrontational method, that they directly confront the state with their ideas. So they're in a struggle, they're in a fight. Then you have the critical solution. So they try to transform society first instead of political transformation. And that brings me to also a discussion between Nkrumah and Fanon, which I find interesting. And that is that Nkrumah said, "Seek first your political kingdom, and then all else shall be added unto you." So you saw that this became the main method for transformation in Africa, that through elections, through guerrilla warfare, to coup d'etat, people focused on Nkrumah's strategy: first capture political power, then all else shall be added unto you. But we saw that then indeed all else was added onto these leaders, onto the political groups with power, but not on society. So transformation stayed away. Well, Fanon was the other. He said that actually for anything to change, everything needs to change. So it doesn't work if you just capture political power, then all else, it will turn back to the same system. So anything needs to change, everything needs to change for anything to change. And then this is interesting that what this critical group of youth is doing, they're trying to first transform society through music, through art, through activism, and from that idea gain new ideas how they can transform the state. And you see that based on these political innovations, that they find new ways. For example, I like the idea of they called it creative activism. So it's activism, but ways in predicting what the state and the media will do. So, for example, with the slums, if they want to attract attention, they think very well what are the intentions of the media, world media, local media, but also the government, so they can become interested in our message. They are learning how to use peaceful demonstrations. Then other ways are, for example, usage of elections. So we currently saw in Uganda that they have a president for the last 35 years, Museveni. They claim it's a dictator and that they've rigged elections before. So they predicted this time you will again rig the elections. But instead of just tapping it again, you saw also that they're very tech savvy. So they are able to use ICT and all the new technology to overcome what they expect to happen. So they organized, they made an app, YouVote, where they compiled and protected all the votes of the people to prevent that the state was able to rig the elections. So, for example, while the state itself was telling about how the president got a certain vote, and it was reproduced by the world media, you saw that they were actually collecting other different votes, and they said it's the vote of the people. So you also find that I found that there are two different perspectives: the outside-in perspective, which is often used by the government, and then by the government, it's taken over by the world media. But it's a completely different perspective from the inside-out perspective. It's from these youth themselves and what they see and what they claim. So, for example, these election results. And then what I also find very interesting is how they are using modern communication to communicate this inside-out perspective. So they are making the inside-out perspective the main perspective. They are connecting not only to fellow citizens, but to all over in Africa, but also in the world. So I think that's the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you very much for your presentation. Please, as I said before, kindly to the audience, kindly note the question to be asked shortly. I would like to check if Dr. Christian Stefan is in the room.
Yes, hello, I'm here.
Don't think so.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, please, welcome. You have 10 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh. Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak in this panel. Today I want to share some thoughts and empirical observations with you, which I entitle Navigating Uncertainty Amidst COVID-19. And the empirical insights come from Nakuru in Kenya. Let me start by saying that this presentation is based on collaboration between 5 researchers in Nakuru and Nairobi and 3 postdoctoral researchers in Kenya and Germany. While some of the research assistants prefer that their names are not mentioned, I want to take this opportunity to thank them for the work they did and the discussions we have had so far on how to do and how not to do collaborative research during a pandemic. Much attention is given to low-income settlements in African capitals like Accra, Cape Town, Lagos, or Nairobi. However, in this presentation, let us have a look at or into the everyday lives of people in Nakuru, an uprising city in Kenya's Rift Valley. Nakuru, and especially its urban dynamics, have not been in the focus of so many research projects up to date. And we therefore want to take the chance to share knowledge gained from qualitative research carried out during the COVID-19 pandemic between June and August 2020 in 4 of Nakuru's estates, which are often denominated as slums. And the selected estates are Bondeni, Ronda, Kaptembo, and Shabab. There are various narratives around life in slums in African cities. COVID-19 seems to have added yet another layer of narration about the living conditions in these settlements. While social distancing is a major practice present in our lives today, Chikoko, a Nigerian radio collective, argues that social distance is a luxury, even if it doesn't feel like a luxury. Chikoko underlined the following. Because of the pandemic, conditions in communities like ours are increasingly being featured in stories on the national and international media. None of this is news to us. While on one hand, news reports underline precarious lives in African slums during COVID-19, on the other hand, the question is asked, what innovations come from Africa in these times? So here on the left side of the photograph, you can see a UNDP report published in 2020 presenting 50 African innovations tackling COVID-19. For example, a COVID-19 awareness app or an ethical hand sanitizer factory built up in Rwanda. But the question I want to ask is, when thinking about innovation, who calls what, when, and why an innovation? With this, I want to bring up the thought that one woman's innovation might be another woman's everyday survival practice. When we start thinking about innovations during COVID-19 and even before, a relevant area seems to be food security. However, to again quote Chikoko, without the resources to stock up or store perishables, Many households need to work and go to market daily. And in the absence of social security, the alternative to going out to work is going hungry. At the same time, we see that, for example, national actors in Kenya bring forward green farming innovations in informal settlements in Nairobi. Rather than talking about innovations, I want to present some empirical findings under the heading of navigating uncertainty. And I have selected interview quotes from the Nakuru low-income settlements in 3 thematic areas. These, of course, are very selective. I have selected 3 different thematic areas, but there are many more from the interviews. The first thematic area is food security. And you can find some quite different connotations on what food security means and how this might be related to uncertainty or what you could call innovations. The first person says, the rich are scared of the disease, not hunger. But if you find a poor person, he will tell he is afraid of hunger than corona. One man describes his strategy to assure food security for his family as follows. I decided now that this life is becoming hard. Let us go back home, and back home there, Marigat. Every farmer has half a hectare plot to live in, so my kids stay there. And the third interview partner mentions, my farm has become a friend of mine during daytime. So I dedicate most of my time in the farm. In fact, most of those things you are mentioning, they all require finance. For you to go anywhere hanging out, that is finance, and that finance means money. The second thematic area is school closures and early pregnancies. One person says that, like now the school stopped operating, so when you were in Form 4, you knew by the end of this year you will finish. But right now, by the next year, you will be in Form 4, so that is a big gap. Related to school closures is the drastic increase in early pregnancies in Nakuru. One interview partner mentions, here is a challenge, especially for the children in Rwanda and neighborhood. There are girls who are already pregnant having children, and this might cost them their future. But however, there's a quite different opinion presented by another interview partner. Positive things after Corona may be the children who are bringing other children to the world. Children are just giving birth. New life is the only opportunities. And the third and last thematic area that I want to present is an outlook on post-COVID and the future. While one interview partner, he mentions that Corona has ruined everything. When the year started, we knew this year has started well. This year, we saw things were so good. Everybody had their own vision. I had my own vision too. I will help myself, and I want to see, and I see a way of prospering in life. Another interview partner recites a famous slogan among Kenyans, which says, "Tunautumia, tunasema sisi ni wengi kuliko COVID," which is a slogan that means we walk more than COVID. We walk faster than COVID. People say they are hustling or they are working more and moving even faster than this COVID can walk. And you might wonder, where in these empirical examples do we find innovations, ingenuity, or creativity? I think we have seen a quite ambivalent picture of how people in slums of Nakuru evaluate the consequences of COVID-19 measures and the practices that people perform in these times. Are these innovations? I have called, as I said before, these practices navigating uncertainty, and it's disputable where we can call something, or we should call something, an innovation. Linked with COVID-19 are deep and radical uncertainties, as cultural anthropologist Arjun Appadurai says. This level of uncertainty has taken many by surprise. However, for many people, not the least people living in low-income settlements in Nakuru, uncertainty is nothing new. I want to highlight a concept presented by Appadurai, which he calls the capacity to aspire. In his book, The Future as a Cultural Fact, he describes this capacity to aspire as a navigational capacity through which poor people can effectively change the terms of recognition within which they are generally trapped. Linked with this capacity is future-directed activity and a way of dealing with uncertainty on an everyday basis. And I want to link this concept with ideas put forward more recently by Sabelo Ndlovu-Gacheni, who identifies our current condition as a civilization crisis that has long been predicted by Césaire. In his 2020 article, he intends to envision a post-COVID-19 world order. And he puts forward the argument that it is not possible to do so without epistemologies of the global south, which are largely experiential and experimental knowledges. So this conference is called Africa Knows. And I think, the name of the conference says that it's Africa that knows. It's not researcher X, it's not scientist Y or author X who knows, but Africa knows. So I want to finish by saying that we need these experiential and experimental knowledges beyond what can be called innovation or what can be measured as an innovation. We need those knowledges to deal with the crisis, not the COVID crisis alone, but the general crisis we are in. Thinking about the challenges people face in low-income areas, but also when I've been thinking about the challenges people face in my neighborhood in Germany currently in times of COVID, I want to end by saying that the knowledges and epistemologies we had are actually under deconstruction. The innovations or the meanings of innovation that we had are under deconstruction. So what we can do now is co-construct local knowledges and practices that help low-income communities and also other communities to aspire. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stefan. Thank you very much for the very, very insightful presentation. I would like to check, please, again, kindly write down your questions and comments. We are getting to that very soon. I would like to check if Dr. Albert is in the room now. Dr. Okelome, if he's in the room. It looks like he's not here. Okay. If it's not here, I'll therefore take the floor to quickly speak about the contribution of slums to the South African jurisprudence on the right to housing. My internet is very unstable. That's why I'm not, I don't want to share this share the screen here, because if I do, I'm likely to go off as being kind of waiting to see whether I will be able to even share the session. So not to overload my network, I will simply speak a bit off the cuff, even if I want to be looking at my notes. Being from a legal background, I try to see what is the role of slums in advancing law and protection of human rights. That led me to look at the concept of meaningful engagement, which is very important in the South African legal context these days. And I try to understand how do we get to that. What I've noticed that we need to understand, we need to look, as this presentation will do, at the South African legal context and the law of eviction. We need to look at slum dwellers and their role in developing the jurisprudence on the right to housing, with special attention to the concept of meaningful engagement. And then, as a corollary to that, we need to look at what the concept does for slum dwellers when you discuss the right, what we call the right to the city. For the first point, I found out that during apartheid, exclusion of Black people who was a general and had to live in very impoverished community. And at the time, the main law governing the land was the Prevention of Illegal Squatting Act of 1951. Yes. This particular law kind of prohibited illegal squatting. So all those Black people who have to live in townships and in very distant places could not come to the city. Otherwise, you will become an illegal squatter and you will be arrested. So the law essentially seeks to protect white people in South Africa, protect their properties from the Black majorities who were the poor. And this link up with what Eric was saying in his presentation, in saying seek first the political kingdom. Well, in South Africa, what happens after apartheid? There was this new constitution that came. In the constitution, you have section 25 of the constitution that still protects the sanctity of the right to property. You cannot violate a person's property. But under section 63 of the same eviction order, only if a legislation permits to do so. And now, that main law of 1951 was replaced by another law that is called the Prevention of Illegal Eviction from an Unlawful Occupation. Meaning, if a person illegally occupies my property, after some time, I cannot simply say, you are illegal here, go away. The state is obliged under the law these days to provide alternative accommodation. So that means what? Evict someone, you need to follow the procedure. And the court now, the law was mentioning the need to act in a very equitable way. But what happened? We have all these laws that look so good in papers, but it's a socio-economic right, housing and eviction. All over the world, especially in Europe, in North America, even in many other African countries, these rights are not justiciable. This means you cannot claim them in a court of law. However, in South Africa, in the case of occupier of 51 Oliver Road, Berea Township in Johannesburg, simply to say, people from that particular township, they move into a land. There were almost 400 of them. And they created a real slum where they were completely settled. And the owner of the land went to court seeking to evict them. And the court said, but how do you evict these people? Where do you put them? These are slum dwellers. You can't simply evict them as you think. But now then the High Court refused completely to evict them. And on appeal, the appeal court, because the city was the one trying to evict these people. Then on appeal, the appeal court said, you can't evict them without developing what today is called a meaningful engagement with them. You must engage with slum dwellers meaningfully, meaning you must explain to them and find alternative accommodation for them. And in this particular case, it was very interesting because in the process of engaging with them as per the court order, both parties found that there was no need to evict them. So now the concept of meaningful engagement followed suit and became generalized in any other eviction case. You say you cannot chase a person from a property without meaningfully engaging with them. You will see that in the Joe Slovo case, in the Tubelisha case, a long list of cases. But interestingly, the jurisprudence or the decision of the court developed beyond evictions. Even if you want to remove a child from school for some reason, in protecting the right to education of a child, you need to meaningfully engage with the school. Meaning, if a civil society goes to court to complain about the school that does not have the appropriate infrastructure, the court will always encourage both parties to meaningfully engage. That enables the party to get alternative remedies. And that has become almost rampant in the South African legal system. And lastly, when you look at it, what are the implications of the corollary of that on the enjoyment of the right to the city? In many African countries, when you want to build a city, you come and remove slum dwellers without asking them. These days, they have the right to participate in the decision to remove them. If they are happy to be in Kibera, to be in Mamelodi, to be in any township, to be in Bari, in Zimbabwe, you can't just remove them without the meaningful participation of the decision. And if they don't want to leave that place you call slum, they cannot be removed. Now, as far as the significance of this is, but because people talk about this magnificent South African jurisprudence that protect the right to housing without linking it to slum dwellers. Slum dwellers were the source of the transformation that was coined in the Constitution. Many people say South Africa Constitution is transformative. A law is empty if it's not put to test. And in the particular cases related to the right to housing, as I just mentioned, slum dwellers were the one to give the voice to this provision of the law that's seek to transform the country. And in that regard, I believe they should be recognized as those who advance the development of the law of eviction in South Africa. Thank you. I will take back my chair cap and try to say, let's take questions, comments, and reactions for all the presentations. If possible, please also address the question to a specific person. And if it's not for a specific person, for everybody else who can answer in the panel. Thank you. I do not see a hand as yet, or yes, Christian. Yes, I see Christian's hand is up, and then we will take Mesola after him. After her. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question that is directed to the presentation by Oluwatoyin. You were talking about children as a catalyst for change. And you also addressed that it's sometimes maybe a challenge to argue why children are a catalyst for change. I would like to learn from your experience, how do you argue, how do you maybe convince others is not the right word, but how do you argue for that importance of children as a catalyst for change? I've experienced challenges myself arguing with my colleagues why I should listen to a child from kindergarten about flood experience. They asked me, what can you actually learn from a child from kindergarten about flood experience and about living with floods? So since that time, I've been constantly with this question, and you raised it. So I would really love to learn from your experience of how do you do it?
Okay, Christine, thank you very much for your question. Can I go ahead, please?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for your question. Now, like I said while I was presenting, I understand that sometimes it is very difficult to say that you want to use children as catalysts for anything. Because a lot of people would ask you, why do you think that if they are not listening to the adults, they would want to listen to the children? But the experiences are somewhat different. Now, in my presentation, I mentioned that one of the findings was that I discovered that many of the children had never stepped out of this vicinity. They never went out of this vicinity. They didn't even know that they were being deprived or that there was another experience totally for them outside of the one they've always known. So asking these children, it was a case of saying that, what are your experiences to start with? What do you think you can learn from these children to start with? Okay, so if the adults have been saying that we need the government of our country, the governor of our state to do something for us, and these people are not doing, they're not willing to listen. How about getting children to speak empathically on certain things that concern the environment? How about seeing children cry that they want to see the outside world? How about seeing children say that their experiences are somewhat different from what the adults are experiencing? How about seeing children say that some of our people are in school, why are we not in school? How about seeing children say that I do not know why I cannot have access to quality education like other people outside of that place? So I understand that you're going to have a lot of challenges, especially that some people will just don't want to waste their time listening to children speak. I understand that part of it. But at the same time, it depends on how you are able to convince these children to start with. If these children do not feel the need for any of this, then you will not get them to do anything positive. For instance, if they do not see the need for them to have quality education beyond the one that they already have, if they do not key into that vision, you cannot make them catalysts for anything. If they do not see the need for them to have electricity within their environment, you cannot make them to speak on the need for electricity within that environment. If they do not see the need for them to have some infrastructures within their environment, then you cannot train the children to ask for some of these things. So in my own opinion, you have to make the children see the need for these things first. When the children can feel the need for these things, then they can be able to speak to the adults. That's what I think. That's not without challenges, I understand, but it is very possible to still see children as catalysts for social change. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. We take a question from Metsola and then from Eric. Please, Metsola, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. In fact, I have a question to you, first of all, and then I also have a question for Eric. But I will now start because your presentation was the last one, so it's kind of fresh in my mind at the moment. Thank you very much for that excellent and informative presentation. It's always fascinating as somebody doing research on Namibia to hear cases related to or stemming from South Africa, because these are in many ways kind of sister countries due to the long-term shared histories, and also legislatively that is the case. And in Namibia, there's something similar to what you described has occurred. There used to be, the city of Windhoek, for example, used to evict informal residents or squatters on the basis of the Squatters' Proclamation of 1985, until that was challenged in court. I think it was about 10 years ago or so, and that challenge also stemmed from a kind of a case or a series of eviction procedures, and now what the court ruled is quite similar to what you described, that you cannot do it without a court order and without alternative, a relocation side that you provide to these people. But now to come to my question, in the case of Windhoek, this did not kind of completely change course when you look at what the authorities are doing, but it rather changed the methods of trying to control land occupations. So what they now try to do is to fence off areas, to monitor newcomers so that they can prevent land occupations even before people have managed to settle and kind of gain that right to stay there. So I'd be interested in hearing how that has played out in South Africa, whether it has there changed the approach and methods of the authorities in terms of controlling land and land occupations. And
perhaps you can go ahead with the second question. Then
okay.
Respond.
Yeah. So and then I have a question to Eric. Also, extremely interesting kind of presentation that I find in many ways thematically close to my concerns. And you also touched on some quite big things there, quite many of them boldly, which is great to hear. And I mean, towards the end of your presentation, you talked quite a lot in terms of state versus society. And to my ear, that sounded quite a strict dichotomy in the way you presented that. And I was wondering if that's something to do with the way you or we conceptualize the state. On the basis of what you said, it sounded pretty much as if you were speaking about the political regime or the government when you were speaking about the state. But then you can also think of the state as kind of a constellation of various institutions that kind of operate over long term and are often not kind of dependent on regime changes or who happens to hold political power at any given moment. And I was just wondering if your view of state-society relations in Uganda would in any way be different. I mean, or would vary according to how you define the state and the scope of the state.
Okay, thank you. Do we respond before we take? Because I see Tonje's hand is up. Perhaps we can respond. Then Eric and myself can respond, and then we take Tonje's hand, please, if you don't mind. Okay, thank you very much for the question. Definitely, the difference between South Africa, Namibia, and many other countries is that in reality, there is a lot of judicial activism, meaning the court are so prompt to transform. You can actually see the politics behind the law. You can actually see the politics that inform the adoption of this legislation. The court is so prompt, and they will actually be telling you that the concept of Ubuntu, which is the togetherness, the community way of life, dictates that we cannot simply remove people from their land. And it became from slums, so to speak. The court, the judicial activism is so high that the state actually is at some point cornered, because suddenly you see people just erecting a check somewhere and their friends and family come. Now, when the state even when the state goes building fences, these fences sometimes are put aside. And it's very risky, because that's why we saw in South Africa at some point how Section 25 of the Constitution on the right to property was threatened. The push was so high that there was a talk about expropriating the land without compensation. And that's where, at that particular moment, the state started to say, no, even if we want to take the land, let's do it as willing buyer, willing seller. So they will rather try to see if the owner of the land is willing to sell, of course, not at the fair price. They will basically try to negotiate more. But this created a social tension to some extent that the state, given that the majority of those that are running the countries today, most of their relatives have no place to stay. And remember, if the state starts today to say we have to refuse to give, to allow people to just occupy. Remember, in the Constitution, in Section 26, they also provided that they were going to give the right to housing to everyone. Now they are not giving housing to the poor. And the poor, sometimes they will occupy in reaction for their own houses. Like, okay, if you don't want me to do this, then give me what you promised me in the Constitution. So the state is caught between a rock and a hard place because they don't have the means to give the house to everyone. And they can also go around fencing everywhere. Now it becomes most of the time negotiation with the representative of the slum, to find a middle ground, to find a reasonable accommodation for them. So it's not as rigid as in Namibia, where suddenly they just say, no, this cannot happen, and they find ways. And in South Africa, one of the things that also makes it so difficult, civil society organizations are tough. The civil society in this country, they basically run the country. So the state also is avoiding to have all these civil society organizations on their back. They settle many cases out of court. Because if it goes to court, the state will lose the case. So interestingly, we've seen that slum dwellers have been those that did a lot in transforming the law into a real transformative tool for an equalitarian society. And the state, unlike in Namibia, unlike in my country of birth, in Cameroon, where I was born, you can't go there and say you just occupy. Well, common law will not, civil law will not allow you to do that. You are arrested and locked up, and that's it. But here, no, it's so common, you are even afraid to leave a vacant land without attending to it. So that's simply due to a lot of judicial activism and the strength of litigators who will try to use strategic litigation to take advantage of the situation to empower slum dwellers, because in reality, we have to consider the legacy of apartheid, which is still very strong with inequalities in South Africa. And based on that, the state still need them. The ANC still needs slum dwellers during election. Now, they try always to strike a balance between evicting and meaningfully engage them. And that's why they most of the time prefer to engage and find an understanding with slum dwellers. I hope I tried to answer your question. And I will give the floor to Eric to answer. Then we take the question from Tondies. Please, Eric, over to you.
Yep, thanks. So indeed, about the picture of the slums or the people versus the state, and I indeed think that they only talk about two ways that they define the camps: those that eat and those that don't eat. So you either eat or you're not eating. And then those that eat, It doesn't matter if you work in police or you're a member of parliament or judiciary. When you're part of the state, you are eating, and if you're not part of the state, you're not eating. So actually, it makes it indeed quite opposed against the state, and I think that also makes sense. As the state, and then I talked about Nkrumah, the political kingdom. So I think the state, political kingdom, they're around the same thing. And I also combined where is this distrust, from the political kingdom coming from. And I think it also originates from the colonial period, where the colonial administrations, they're the main question, the native question. How can we, as a small minority, oppress the big majority? So instead of preventing them from coming together as a nation, they put them in compartments of tribes or of the urban. So I think that's also why townships are so crucial. They compartmentalize the societies to prevent them from uniting and building into finding ways in empowering the society. So they actively kept society weak. So the state, the political kingdom could remain it. I am writing a book about it, The Unfinished Revolution, where I coin it the system of oppression. It's a bit radical, but I think or the system of control. So what they try to do, the political kingdom tries to maintain the control of this small minority over the big majority. And I think that's exactly also what these people in the slums are saying about those that eat and those don't eat. And so the only way will be to transform that political kingdom in finding a new way, because the current political kingdom seems to be the colonial systems not being abolished, but adopted by the African leaders. So in that sense, it's a continuation of that minority rule, with the only difference that it's now local elite instead of foreign elite that controls it.
Thank you, Eric. Let's take the question from Tonjet. Tonjet, sorry for keeping you waiting, sir. Please,
No.
over to you.
No problem at all. I really enjoy everything I hear, so it's great pleasure. Now, I try to connect a few things. This panel is about innovations from slums and in slums, and very important concept is this concept that Eric introduced. It's the bridge builders, people who cross over. And he refers to Cabral as using this interesting concept of class suicide. Now, the very crucial question is, who are those bridge builders? Who are the ones crossing over? Both crossing over from one field of interest to another field of interest. That's very often happening within innovations in science and in academia, but particularly also crossing over in society from one particular group to the other particular group. Now, if you go back to Cabral and how he came to that notion, very important role in his environment was played by doctors, by medical doctors. And very much the medical doctors played a role of bridging and really discovering what was the life people lived. And quite a number of those medical doctors then radicalized and joined the political movement of Cabral. And that happened in other African countries as well. And it happened in Europe a lot, if you look at the European history. Now, my question to Christian is, if you do this research in Nakuru on COVID and its impact, what role do these medical professionals, both the doctors and the nurses, play in bridging and in connecting? And what role do they play in discovering the innovations and the innovative capacities of the slum dwellers? And what do they do with it? Complex question, isn't it?
Thank you very much for taking up this bridge builders concept again and introducing your question to me like that. For me, it would be really hard to answer this question at this moment in time, because the research that we carried out, we constantly had a discussion about what do we do with the medical personnel. Do we include them in our in our empirical data collection, in our research of the qualitative in the qualitative process, and so far we have not. So we have missed the chance of talking to a crucial part in society and in that sphere, in that phase. But I think it would only be guesses. I would only make guesses if I said something about it now, because really I do not know so much about it. I know that from those people that we talked with, we have qualitative interviews with more than 200 people in Nakuru and in 2 Nairobi slums, but there was little mentioning of medical personnel. Many people mentioned that they are to be found in the hospital, but I think apart from medical doctors, there are of course other people who share information, who also gather and collect information about people's innovations and people's strategies to adhere to hygienic measures or to do other things. But I think I'm not the right person to answer this question.
Okay, what I observe very, very often in my own research in Africa is that where the state is absent or not trusted, and people care for themselves, also in the sense of building their health facilities themselves, then the ones who play the roles as nurses really are in-betweens. And the social innovation that happens from these local level initiatives then is a kind of key point or a central point from where lots of other things are happening. And I wonder if that's also the findings of some of the other people in this great group of authors.
Yes, please. Can anyone add to that, Eric? Mutsola, yourself, can you, or Christian, or Toyin, if you can?
Yeah.
I hope I can call you Toyin. Yeah.
I personally, I have not. I'm going to look right now, or I'm going to start looking, because it's very interesting to. I saw it in other historical cases, but not yet in the slums of Kampala. So it's a great point to keep my eyes open for the nurses and the medical doctors. I did have 2 other questions to the speakers. I'm not sure if this is also the moment to ask.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes. So first, I had a question to Olo Wotain about very interesting about this youth, and I think it also comes that even though there's extreme poverty, then the belief that every single person has a talent, actually that creates that narrative from thinking of scarcity on opportunity, on innovation. So you find out it doesn't matter how poor you are or how much, every person has a talent. So you find it out with music or talent development. And so you still give them the confidence in building on that talent. And then I think it brings us back to Cabral, because he said that actually the starting point of revolution or transformation is a cultural revolution. So the focus on the music, but also clothing, on realizing your own African identity. And then the main element was the liberation of the mind. So I think it's very interesting what you say. I remember from one of my classes about culture with the Africa Study Center, and then with the image that art is the mother of revolution. So I found it so impressive that I still remember it. But I think that also comes close with that, how you're using art or creative activism with the minds of these youth, that you're finding a way of liberating their minds and therefore opening up them for social, economic, political transformation in their own communities. So yeah, not really a question, but more observation.
Okay.
And I have a second one for you, Serge, about
yes.
Indeed, that also brings me back to the colonial period. So that the colonials, they said, okay, from now on, we control the cities, or the cities is for the white European, and those uncivilized Africans, they live as peasants on the rural areas. So it was better to keep that segregated. But I think, again, that's also a legacy that has endured even though there was independence, that it doesn't matter if it's the colonial authorities or the current local elite authorities. They try to prevent this urbanization or remain it in the outskirts, not giving them rights to become true urban citizens. I think because maybe it's not yet a confirmed narrative, but that urban areas or slums are breweries for democracies. So actually that urbanization, that could have a direct relation with democratization. And one thing that confirms this is that actually China at this moment, they're trying to push urban citizens back into the countryside. And I think you saw the same thing with apartheid, that there was, in South Africa, there was a strong urbanization, stronger than all other areas. And then they tried to push it back into the in the townships. So I think this narrative is already known by those that want to maintain minority rule. But it could be very interesting if we start seeing slums as the breweries of democracy instead of something else.
Yeah, if I may, or if I may, yes, Eric, I would say great observation. However, I see this as I would say the thing, that observation has two faces. Definitely, and I agree with you, slum can be the brewery for democracy, for revolution. But at the same time, there are so many in slums that believe that they are cursed. They become so desperate. So if you are in a slum and you don't have, I would say, a leader or a platform that brings you to understand your situation. And your example in Kampala, what this musician did, when you look at how reggae music grew, developed, is people from slums who said, now we need to be free now. But when you go to slums, you also see a level of desperation, a level of suicide, a level of people who think that there is nothing. There is nothing. They actually think it's a curse to be down on the scale. And that's why I like this particular conference, because, and as Christian said, when you say Africa's nose, it's meaning as researchers, what can we unearth? Now, if our research is community-based, we go to community, we don't bring our problems or problematics, we listen to their problematic and we work with them. Because in many slums, as much as it could be a very good brewery, as you said, but sometimes when you go to some slums, even here, you go to Johannesburg, you go to some slums, you for instance, I went to a slum where I saw a family of 7, nobody's working, nobody's doing anything. And I said, how do you live? And the guy said, we steal. You see, now when you go live, you live out of theft, you expose yourself to police that can shoot, you can die anytime because when they say they steal, someone can, in the process, kill you for a cell phone. And people will be saying, oh, there is too much crime in South Africa. This is the result of inequality. Now, how do we tap into that anger created by famine and poverty for them to bring out the revolution, like it happened in the so-called Arab Spring in Tunisia, when the guy said, I can't take this anymore, and he molested itself, and it ended up chasing Ben Ali from power. That came from slums. So that's why I say you are correct, but we should also factor the fact that how do we save those who are so desperate they don't believe anymore that a better life is possible through their talent. So that's how I will, perhaps the part that I say we should also try to uncover how we can do that. As a researcher, when I go to slum, I'll never wear a suit because the people will not listen to the message. You are talking, you wear a shirt and sandals like them. Now, those who are already eager to do something will do something, but at the same time, let's take into consideration those that are yet to believe that anything good could come out of where they live. Yes, I see. Toyin, do you want to comment? Or Christian has a question? Okay, Christian? Okay, you can comment before Christian. After you, Christian can take the floor.
I think, I'm not sure that he asked a question. He only made a contribution. Now, however, there was a comment, yes. However, I would like to say that the project was initiated, like I said, for 2 reasons. Now, for the children, it's about, you have to train the children first. You have to let them know what they need first. You have to let them know that they have been deprived. You have to let them know that there's need for them to take certain steps. So it is not just psychosocial. You are giving them some psychosocial form which has to do with intelligence. You are giving them psychosocial intelligence. And then, of course, you're also training them on how to communicate with the environment for the social needs of, or the general needs of everybody. So it's not just about them talking about the environment. They have to take in something first before they are able to divulge what they have inside of them to members of the public and the communities where they live. That's it, basically.
Okay, I see Christian's hand is up, and Eric's hand is up as well. So we take Christian first, and then Eric. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. I think it connects very good to what Toyin just said, because I wanted to also take up what Eric said, and then you commented on it, Serge, about this. On the one hand side, in slums, there's desperation, there's suicide, there's not a future perspective, let's say. And then on the other side, you find a democracy, longing for democracy, and you find these art expressions and art as a mode of revolution. So I'm always challenged by this concept. I've talked about it, this capacity to aspire, which Arjun Appadurai is talking about, and he takes examples from India, from slums there, and says, in order to have this capacity to aspire, you need, when you're poor, you have less of this capacity to aspire. And I always want to challenge it and say, can this really be? I think if you say, okay, from slums there comes democracy, from slums there come revolutions. So what really is this capacity to aspire, and why should it be less developed or less given in places where there are poor people? So there's somehow an ambivalence. And as Toyin just said, okay, for children, you need to give them something. You need to give them something so that they can know what to ask for, what to demand for, and how to fight. So it's actually not really a question, but I would be happy if any of you who have just raised those questions also say, how do you conceptually grasp this ambivalence of desperation and aspiration?
Yes, thank you, Eric. You have your hands up. We can get back to Christian.
I like to, this time, not Cabral, but somebody else, Fanon, and I think he provided the answer for what we're talking about. So when they wrote about the wretched of the earth, I think we're talking about the people in the slums. So they are survival mindset, desperation, they feel cursed in this marginalization. So they're focused on survival. And maybe they're feeling like prisoners or captives of the system. But he also claimed that there can be psychological liberation or a cleansing experience when you become part of something like a revolution or something else. So in that sense, I think by using, again, art or liberating the mind, or maybe not liberating the mind, but getting them active in such a experience, like you now see in Kampala, that they all feel people power, Bobby Wine. They are, by that experience, they are transforming themselves from subjects focused on drinking, drugs, maybe football games, into citizens that are concerned about their nation and that project. So you see different behavior coming out. So I think he provides the answer with starting a revolution. So you take people in the slums with that cleansing experience, that they feel a new identity within that experience.
Yeah, if I may add, well, no matter how much slums provide hope, as you say, there is a strong level of desperation because many slum dwellers are not even aware of their strength. And that's what Christian also was trying, in my view, to highlight, that ambivalence is there. People in slum are not aware of their strength. And generally, or very often, they are used by politicians. When you come to South Africa, I am sure Ms. Wallach could be aware of that, given the closeness of Namibia and South Africa. You hear this movement called Black Land First, which are a group of people that are from slums, but who will fight for a piece of land, but they will never get it. They are used by those that have the means of exploitation. So this, in my view, one way is, again, through education and institutions that provide funding. How much go to slums? When you say we are giving scholarships, it's like the intellectual or the elite. We meet in our places, we fund programs to kids that are already able to read and that know what is a revolution. As Toyi said, the kids in slums do not even know what they need to do. Now, those who run programs, who go to the point that you run programs, you end up simply taking those who already have a master's degree, who already have an honor degree. In slum, many were not lucky enough to go beyond primary school. And from experience, we had a program, what we call the Young African Leadership Initiative, that we had here. It was without publicity, it was a project or a program funded by the Obama administration through US aid in partnership with my university, where we were training people in leadership, entrepreneurship. But the condition to come there, you did not need to be a normal person with a degree. In class, you have people who spent all their time in jail, and they left jail and they were living in slums. Now, we try to see what leadership was in them. So criteria of admission also include a person who is just an artist in a slum. Of course, in class, we also have pilot, people who could fly a plane. You could have people doing their PhD. But at the end of the day, it's a certificate that was tailored to meet the needs not only of those that know already, but also those who don't know. And it helped a lot of people who came from slum to even realize that they were also able to go and do things in their communities. And that's how you see someone who have anger from spending 20 years in prison in such a class. When he comes from the class, he goes back and he's the one fighting crime through community activism in slums. So in my view, it's, of course, that dichotomy is there. But how do we change the narrative? The danger is we should avoid being the teacher. We should engage those people to understand their perspective and shed light on them and grow them. Perhaps by doing that, people will be empowered to live the dream that they have, because you see a person who has almost everything in them. Yeah. I saw Eric hands. Is there anybody before Eric?
Yes, okay, I have Eric, a question,
if
please.
there is nobody to speak before you, we take your hand. Thank you. Yes, Josiane, please, I did not see your hand. Sorry. Please, you speak first before Eric.
Thank you, Eric. Yes, I want to ask a question to Oluwatoyin about the role of parents in your project, and what are the next steps of the project. And then to all the speakers, I have a kind of provocative question. That is, we are describing slums as, like Serge said, full of desperation, and slum dwellers as poor, vulnerable, which is true. And that's true even outside slums. We also describe them as a kind of reservoir of experiential knowledge, political innovations, uninvested talents, etc. And it's like most of the people we encounter, we can describe them as such. So I was kind of wondering if we are not reproducing hidden biases, like what are the biases that we can reproduce because we are really focusing on slums and slums dwellers? That's my question.
Yes, I am so excited about this question, but as a chair, I don't want to take it first. Unless there is nobody to take it first, but I can respond, unless someone wants to go before me.
Yes, I can take my own question first. Yes, thank you for your question. I forgot to mention that, Eric said something about hunger. He said something about being poor. Now, I discovered that when we first got to this location, when we first started with the children, the parents were not interested. They saw it as a sheer waste of time in the first place. And then I told my colleagues that one of the ways to get the attention of these children would be to provide them with lunch and some drinks and all of that. So the parents they got so interested that some of them were saying that I'm ready to be part of the show. I'm ready to be part of this. So it was really good that we initiated that, because they can't be hungry, and you're telling them that you want to teach them dance, you want to give them acting skills, you want to help them develop this or develop that. So because we provided that, the parents were willingly letting their children come for the rehearsal, because they know that at least the idea of lunch or breakfast would have been taken care of one way or the other. Now, this project, like I said, is inconclusive. The project is not over. It goes beyond just calling the attention of the government to this vicinity. Seeing these children smile, seeing them smile gives me so much joy. So I will not just abandon them at this stage, saying that I have concluded my project or anything. I am definitely going back there. And this time I am looking for ways, if I can get sponsors, it makes it better. It means that it's going to be even larger than I ever imagined. So I'm still working towards going back to this to Makoko slum to make it work for them. And I really want the children to be able to speak. I don't want to go there to start talking about, okay, come, we want the government to come and do something. I want it to come from the children. I want them to talk to the government by themselves. So I'm definitely going back there with the team of researchers, definitely. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I see Eric had the hand up. Then we take Metsola after Eric, and then I can come.
I only had a small remark. As you triggered with the hunger, because I had to think back about medieval Europe, where you had the institution of the church, and they always had these two things: food for the body and food for the soul. So they also gave the food, and that made poor people interested to listen to what else they could say. So maybe it's an universal method to lure in people than listening.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Let's listen to Metsola first before I can weigh in.
Okay.
If Islam doesn't say anything, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Josiane, very much for that reaction. I think that was a very important point. I'm not myself a big fan of grand generalizations, and I was kind of thinking when we were discussing here that wait a minute, we are talking about a continent here, and we've been hearing stories and research results from so many different countries, from Nigeria, from Uganda, from Kenya, from South Africa, Namibia, and so on, and each of these are greatly different in so many ways, and so I don't know if it makes much sense to really jump to conclusions about informal settlements or slums in general, and the situations and attitudes, strategies and inclinations of the people living in them, without really always grounding it firmly in the particular context from which it stems. And on top of that, I think in each particular context, you are likely to face a lot of heterogeneity in people's situations, and I think we have to keep in mind. So I thank you, Josiane, for pointing that out.
Okay, thank you very much, Metsola. I am in support of course of that view. However, I think what makes this particular conference unique is exactly the topic, because in mainstream academia, people will not want to discuss that. People will still see slums as outsiders, and people will actually call slum dwellers indigenous people, yet they are not indigenous people. So trying to address this question, in my view, brings it to light, even if on the other side it looks like we are perpetrating the same exclusion. The only difference is that we are reflecting case studies here, as you pointed out, from various countries. And if you look in Africa, of course, we should not generalize, but the reality is that why are slum dwellers not discussed? What I just did today in my presentation, in South Africa, when people talk about the law of eviction, they don't see how it's developed. They give credit to lawyers. They give credit to everything else, but not slum dwellers who are on the ground. That's why we need to unearth the merit of having something good, which will come out perhaps differently not by stigmatizing again. I want to do a small analogy with the right of person with disabilities, which is one of my focus area. I work a lot on that. So many people with disabilities in the past, they were not discussed. It takes an advocacy to consider that. Perhaps the only thing I could say is in a discussion like this one, it's good to have slum dwellers, not only academics, to we apply the disability principle of nothing about us without us. Those conversations, to hear their voice and their perspective, because for me to change systemic discrimination, because we are, and I will tell you in many places, what Eric said, people will say to him, no, there's nothing coming from slums. Because of the stereotype that the elite and the middle class have. That's why it's good that we are able to say no. In reality, slum dwellers have a role to play in development. They bring innovation on their ways. The problem is we need to record what is good to put it on in public, because the bias is that these people are less human than others. And having that conversation starts by pointing out that they are also human and they contribute, they innovate, as we did in the presentation, without kind of generalizing or being biased. That would be how I look at it. And when I was researching for this paper, I can tell you I saw so many things, but nobody conceptualized that and give credit to the slum dweller who was sleeping on the rain on that particular property and could not be evicted. For me, that's how I look at it, uncovering the goodness in slums so that people start giving them the necessary dignity. Perhaps, yeah, that perhaps was my comment on that. Yeah. Unless, I don't know. Josiane, do you want to do a response? Probably, because you raised a very good point. Perhaps, what is your perspectives on that after listening to other views, perhaps?
I was asking the question because I also need answers. So maybe we just have to keep that in mind.
Yes, I think it's a good way. Like if we were to write the paper, perhaps at the introduction, we should really highlight that, and so that it comes across of being a different perspective that narrates a group of people to further their exclusion. Yeah. Well, any other? Yes, Eric, please.
Yeah, I have one last thing, but it's still a search, and I'm not sure if it's correct. But what you talked about Ubuntu, and I think what's also inspirational is so that somehow when you go to maybe Slum in Kampala or in Dakar or Lagos, that somehow you still see this resilience of the communities keeping out for themselves. It somehow we can see Ubuntu in a lot of. It seems that we are looking Ubuntu in a lot of places, and then I'm not sure if this is correct, but is the way I understand it, Ubuntu has a lot of Ntu and Ubu that it also is based. That's over all these language groups based in Cameroon. Of my friend Joan, which is also here, but that the highlands from Cameroon, about 1,000 for Christ, I'm not sure, that they migrated over the Bantu migration. So maybe this Ubuntu is already settled in all those histories, hundreds of years. It's still there within these communities. So that could also provide something that we can also find answers within the slums, within this Ubuntu philosophy, and then maybe not that actually Ubuntu might be a thing that's inspirational for everyone to start studying, as it's a gift for that somehow was preserved in African communities. But it's a general, I'm not sure if this goes too far. But somehow I'm triggered again by this Ubuntu, that somehow that might be a defining factor of slums in Africa. I'm not sure.
No, I don't think you are not overgeneralizing. There is a study by Professor Ben Shigara. He did a book. He wrote a chapter in an edited collection on essay on land in Africa. The editor is Robert Home, where he studied Ubuntu, and he argues that Ubuntu is an African context that coexists in every African country. And he says, in Southern Africa, it comes from the language Nguni, which actually represents the concept of togetherness. But in all African countries, it means something. It's called differently. The fact that you rely on yourself, because in fact, before colonialism and the concept of state, relationships were not horizontal, but it wasn't top down. It was completely, people were living not a top down relationship. So the community used to live together. If you look, it's essay on land law, on land in Africa by Robert Home. It's volume 1 and 2. It's edited by him. It was published by Pretoria University Law Press. And I know this book well because I was a bit involved in managing that project. So it's one of the sources that demonstrate that the concept of Ubuntu is everywhere. And in that book, he said, it's called Umwe in Zimbabwe. I actually have to translate what it could mean in my own language, which he had to capture for the book. So I fully agree with you that the communitarian way of life, it's an African concept. Of course, I was told that it's in every culture, but I say, well, in Africa, it was codified. And that's why the main law of Africa, which is the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, speaks about collective right, the concept of people right. When you say Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it speaks mostly about I or individual rights. But in Africa, you have collective right, group rights. And that's the codification of the notion of people that echoes the principle of Ubuntu. So in my view, you are not overgeneralizing. You are not even generalizing. It is true, it's everywhere. That's what informed the Gacaca in Rwanda, how people came together to find peace after the genocide. It was the same concept. The only thing is that, indeed, how do we tap into that to develop slum dwellers or to have that spirit in elevating slum? And that happened in the South African jurisprudence when they were developing the concept of meaningful engagement. So in my view, you are not generalizing. The problem is not applied. And because for so many, it's rather, people say Western capitalism now has been a dominant system where individualism prevails on the us togetherness. So everyone is about me, myself, my family, mine. I, mine, what belongs to me. Yet in ancient Africa, it was us before you. And I am sure perhaps in Josian's community, no matter how successful you are, if only your biological parents enjoy your success, the village or the community don't see you as successful. That's how it is in my community. where you grew up before going somewhere else. When you get there, you don't limit yourself to your family's or father's house. You go to the neighbor, but here where I live, I know the name of my 2 neighbors because I keep greeting them. So culturally, it's not how I was bred. So in my view, you are not generalizing. And we say in Africa, it takes a community to raise a child, not an individual or a family. Yeah.
Serge, I think our time is over. You have to close.
Yes. It's nice to know. Thank you for letting us know that the time was over. Well, perhaps before you do the official closer, I just want to thank the excellent panelists and participants for their very, very, very insightful comment and very interesting views that will help us to better our thinking while writing this paper. I thank you, and I give you the mic, Josiane. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I would have preferred to not to be on virtual, but to have a beer after our panel. But that's not possible. So maybe next year or in 2 years. Thank you very much. It was really, really, I am stimulated. I hope you too. Thanks a lot. And maybe in 2 years, done. Maybe in 2 years.
Let's hope. And
yes.
we might meet when the big ECAS conference will happen in 2 years. Mm-hmm. So let's hope for that. And thank you very much for a fascinating panel.